The active component of a septic system or a municipal wastewater treatment is the activated sludge. It's the bacteria that eat it. Cyclophosphamide survives close contact with this activated sludge for between 400 and 800 days. There is a chemical cousin of cyclophosphamide called diphosphamide. That one survives for between 10 and 12 years in close contact with activated sludge. This means anything that, the Cancer Society says flush a toilet twice. That just moves it out of your house and down into our environment because nothing's being cleaned out by any system. Next slide. It is found in water around the world. As early as 1996, they were finding it in Germany. I'm sorry the numbers here are kind of small. There was a new testing method that was developed in about 2006. Germany is really leading the way, but even China is testing for it, and they're finding it. Now, if you look, the question about landfill, the effluent from a landfill in Germany, was found to have extremely high levels of cyclophosphamide. So you're getting that from any type of waste, or if you have taken your activated sludge and deposited there from your wastewater treatment, it is just going to come flying out of that. And Lake Geneva, 70 picograms per liter. You say 70 picograms per liter is not very much. Well, to put it in reference, if you had 70 picograms of I-125, which is radioactive iodine, and you drank that, and this is the iodine, the active part, it would wipe out an adult thyroid. We tell women not to drink any alcohol during pregnancy. We tell them not to take an aspirin. So it's okay for them to get a big gulp, which is about a liter, with 70 picograms of cyclophosphamide, and drink that every day during the pregnancy. I don't think that's really what we want to do. Next slide. And we said, okay, that's Europe. What's going on here? Not only is there any published data on testing in the US, there doesn't appear to be any grants that have been approved for academics to even establish, this is in the US, establish the ability to test for cyclophosphamide. Down on the Cape, I guess about more than a decade ago, people noticed that the fish were having high rates of tumors. And so there was an assumption it was from the MMR, the Otis. So the Department of the Interior and the US Geologic Survey went and studied the fish, trying to see, is it real? Is this, the Ashamit Pond is from the plume, and they looked at the Ashamit Pond and they looked at the Sanuit Pond, which only has houses with septic systems around it. Ashamit, over 62% of the fish, this species of fish, had tumors. It was almost 50% in this pond that all it has is septic systems. If you look at this other one that I have, the chart here, now these fall into very high rates of tumors. If you see about the third one down in that high level, that's the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. Now the Cuyahoga River became famous because it caught on fire. This is a big driver for the Clean Water Act in the 60s or 70s, I can't remember. The fish on Cape Cod have worse rates of tumors than we're seeing in the Cuyahoga River. There was nothing from Otis that the US Geologic Survey could determine could cause these effects. And they did a literature search. And the only thing they could find that had been published that showed the same effects as what we're seeing in this fish were fish injected with cyclophosphamide. But for some reason, nobody is testing the ponds. Now, this is Cape Cod, but I don't believe Rhode Island is very different from Cape Cod geologically, way you manage your water. Next slide. And it's like, well, okay, what drugs do we select? Now, there are by the National Laboratory of Medicine, there are over 44,000 drugs. But there are 167 that NIOSH has put on a hazardous drug list, and that means because they are proven to be toxic, carcinogenic, mutagenic, or teratogenic. And employees are required to use special management. Any unused drug or anything that's had a trace contamination is handled as recro waste, and that has been since 1990. So we do not have an issue with these being flushed down the toilet unused. Hasn't been for over a decade. Now, of these 167, there are 61 that are excreted as hazardous material because such a high dose comes out active. In fact, there's one of these that 100% of the dose comes out as the original drug. Cyclophosphamide, as I said, was 25%. Now, if you look at these drugs, you can break them up by their method of action. There are 27 that the sole purpose is to cause DNA damage. Absolutely, it doesn't matter how low a dose you have. You may need a high dose if you're trying to kill a cancer cell, but if you're trying to create cancer, you don't need anything. It's, the way that we use these really serious cancer drugs is you want to give as much as possible without killing the patient. It's effectively taking a sledgehammer to them, and it really is harsh. Sledgehammer and hoping by the time you stop, the patient's still alive, but the cancer is gone. But if you have a very small dose, and I'm talking minuscule, and that goes into a fetus, you could cause an effect that's going to go on for a very long time. Next slide. And we know, nurses are actually at the forefront, and this is why we have the most evidence about what happens to people who are working with people who are taking these drugs. In '86, there was a study that came out of Finland that showed that oncology nurses had a 4.7-fold increase in birth defects versus other nurses, and a 2.7-fold increase in miscarriages. This is why, OSHA and NIOSH came out with these very strict regulations on anybody who works with them. But even now, even the nurses who are now following very strict guidelines, because this stuff is coming out in the sweat, the saliva, the vomit, the feces, it's a problem. All that waste, and it comes out very quickly, so it's like usually 1 to 2 days. They're having, even the recent studies, the nurses are having difficulty conceiving. This is oncology nurses. Difficulty conceiving more premature births. And there was a recent oncology nurse study that came out of British Columbia that showed oncology nurses who worked with oncology units, even for just a short period of time, had a significant increase in both breast and rectal cancer. There were a lot of other cancers popping up, but so many had occurred that they could say it is a serious risk to these nurses.